In this video, I will be attempting to survive 100 days in Alaska in hardcore Minecraft. I'll have to watch out for extreme weather, aggressive mobs, and every 20 days, a winter storm arrives, turning this beautiful landscape into a snowy nightmare. But with that being said, let's get into the video. I spawned in and took a look around. Okay, let's see what we have to work with. Before getting some basic tools crafted, I then got stung by this bush. Oh, okay. I kind of forgot about those, as embarrassing as that might be. And decided on my plan of action. I think it'd be good to explore the area around me, because again, I have 20 days until winter arrives. After eating some sweet berries, I was pleasantly surprised when I went to go and craft a boat. Oh, look at that. And this thing looked really cool. That's sick. Eventually, I came across my first structure. Oh, okay. And a whale that seemed to be beached. But I went towards the structure, only to realize that it was a pillager base. However, this base had wool, and I really wanted to get a bed crafted, as the sun was just now starting to set. And so, I got some wood, and snuck up onto the base. After stealing some wool, I crafted my bed and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke to a little surprise. What? I then realized that I had to get some glass bottles crafted, as I was getting thirsty. After some smelting and drinking, I decided to explore some more, as I wanted to find a nice place to get a base started. Yet, as I rode into the scenic Alaskan waters, something stung me. What exactly was that? After that strange experience, I noticed that the climate around me was changing. We are getting into colder waters for sure. And I was worried that I wasn't equipped for the cold yet. But I soon spotted a campfire and some seals. After finding lots of food in this tent, I put it on the fire to cook, before tearing the tent apart and using the wool to craft some warm clothes. This way I could stay warm even in the harsh cold that I knew I'd soon be facing. And as my food cooked, I said hi to the seals nearby. Hi. The next day, I set off to explore some more and got a pretty cool view of nature being nature. Oh wow, look at that. And that's when I realized just where I was. Prince William Sound is an incredible icy landscape in southern Alaska that contains well over 100 different glaciers. People from around the world come here to see the mountainous terrain, icy waters, and vibrant wildlife, and I can see why. But I eventually decided to head out of the water and climb this nearby mountain, so that I could have a better view of the area. Okay, got some more trees over there. That's why I discovered this forest, which I promptly entered. I spent the rest of the day traversing this dense and never-ending forest, luckily coming across a body of water just as the sun started to set. Bald eagle, okay. After bringing my canoe out, I realized that this was a lake, and this object in the middle of the lake was another, albeit less cool, canoe. The next morning, I woke up to the sight of countless animals. Ooh, bears. All of which I had been wanting to see. I also decided to play a little game called Poke the Bear. Yeah, that turned out well. So that's something that you probably shouldn't do. Anyways, as I looked around some more, I realized that I'd come across yet another one of Alaska's natural landmarks. Denali National Park. This park is home to Mount Denali, formerly known as Mount McKinley, and this isn't just a normal mountain. Denali is one of the 7 summits of the world, meaning it is the tallest mountain on the North American continent, standing at just over 20,000 feet above sea level. And the park around it just proves that Alaska has some of the most unique natural beauty. And while I explored this scenery myself, I also had some thoughts on climbing Denali. So if I am to climb that mountain, then I'd have 2 of the 7 summits climbed. I just have to get the other 5, won't I? I then entered the forest again, and that is where I spent the remainder of my day. I didn't realize just how massive these forests were, but luckily for me, I spotted water before the day ended. And more beached whales. Oh, it's 3 beached whales. Why is this a thing? Oh, and something actually interesting. Ooh, okay, there's a ship off in the distance. The next day, I woke to an interesting wildlife display. How do I assess this situation? Before then boarding the ship, only to realize that there was no one on board. The lower cabin here is completely flooded. And so, I got to looting. And eventually, I came across what must have been the treasure room. But that's when I heard some company. Oh, that's a pillager. Okay. However, with my new dagger in hand, I fought off a few of these pillagers. Okay. Yep, I'm low. Okay. Before turning and running, as I was on the brink of death. One more shot, and I would have been killed. Plus, my shield that I had literally just crafted was already at half its health. But I soon carried on, and found yet another structure. This one had occupants as well, although not very scary ones. The next morning, I cleaned out my inventory, before heading back into the woods. This time, I didn't come across water though. However, as it turns out, water was the one thing I actually needed, as I had completely run out of it, and these berry bushes were quite literally killing me. On day 7, I was in a tough spot. The berry bushes had almost completely ruined my armor, and I desperately needed water, as I was getting really low. And then, I had a stroke of bad luck. Eventually though, I found a river. And even though I spotted some bears, I was hopeful. I got myself healed, and then placed my canoe down, and rode along the river. And no, this was no ordinary river. The mighty Yukon River is an incredible display of nature's power, coursing through almost 2,000 miles of land in both Alaska and Canada. This river is home to tons of salmon, and is famous for the historic Klondike Gold Rush, which occurred in the late 19th century. But as I eyed the banks of the Yukon, it wasn't gold that I discovered. As I rode along the famed river, I came up with a suiting name for my new friend. I think I'll name you Gary. The next morning, I woke up and got back in my canoe, only to be truly impressed with the scenery around me. But cinematics aside, I wanted to start my base, and for that, I would need to find a spot that fit my approval. And so I ventured on, hoping to eventually filter out into the ocean. Except this river is long. Eventually though, I took a few turns and found myself at what seemed to be the Pacific Ocean. And with that in mind, I also found a spot that I actually approved of. And so, I started building. I did a decent amount of work and eventually began on the flooring. On day 9, I got back to work on my base, and was quite surprised when I turned around. As I collected wood, I climbed this spruce tree, only to see a nice view at the top, and perform one of my famous risky jumps. And the next morning, I had a bit of some mob trouble. But with that taken care of, I had now finally built the frame of my house, and I really liked it. I was also pleasantly surprised to see that Gary hadn't gone far at all. And, after some more housework, I had my first guest. And I really couldn't have asked for a better guest. With a lead now in hand, I headed over to Gary and got him attached to this post. On day 11, I found myself wanting to explore the snowy area near my base, and so I did. And what I found was surprising. Oh, okay. Civilization. This village was cool, but didn't have much useful loot. Oh, this is nice. Alright. Skewt. I don't think I need those. Torch, yeah. Then, a storm of some kind swept over the Arctic landscape, and this made it really hard for me to go any further. So, I turned around and headed home. There we are. Okay. The next morning, I realized that I only had about 8 days until the winter storm would arrive, And so, I got to work on making my house safe. I finished all of the windows and eventually got to work on the roof. And the next day, I realized that my roof was slightly lopsided. So yeah, that was fun to notice. But I did a lot more roof work and collected a lot of dark oak slabs. However, on day 14, I wanted to try another Arctic expedition. After all, I was doing well on time, and I was really curious to see what the Arctic was like. So, I crafted a chest and thought of a plan on how I would explore the Arctic without any warm clothes. So, I need to get the wool that is on the little buildings, otherwise I'm gonna freeze. Yet, as I rode towards the site, I started freezing almost immediately. Okay, no, we're already freezing? That's way too soon. I headed back and got myself warmed up before deciding to explore the forest nearby instead. And I'm very glad that I decided to do this. Oh, wait a minute. What is this? This building was really strange, but the contents inside it were even stranger. Not enough. Oh, what is that? Should I touch one? Hi there. You're probably not friendly, right? What's that? I'm sorry. I don't trust you. I have to kill you. Yeah, you do damage. You do damage. Alright, you do damage. After almost being killed by a bunny, I got some dark oak wood and headed home. The next day, I finished the roof. And might I say, this little cabin is looking pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And now, I would finally be prepared for this winter storm, even though I genuinely have no idea what to expect. But with that in mind, on day 16, I decided to try again with my Arctic expedition. My plan was to wear cold clothes, like this leaf armor, and hopefully confuse the temperature. And yes, that was actually my plan, I am not even joking. And more incredibly, it worked. I crafted myself some wool clothes and then set off into the Arctic Circle. While the United States is one of the 8 countries to own land in the Arctic Circle, Alaska's portion is truly special. Endless white expanses of snow and ice, a large population of native polar bears, and views unlike anywhere else in the world, except maybe for the Antarctic. But I wanted to see another thing the Arctic was famous for, the Northern Lights. And so, I stayed up that night, but I didn't have any luck. I did, however, spot something off in the distance. Next morning, I went to go and explore this structure. And, after digging through some ice, I came across some creatures I'd much rather have not come across. Okay. I don't think I'm ready for this yet. Okay. I quickly got out of the submerged structure and resurfaced, knowing that I'd have to explore it when I had better gear. Day 18 was spent finding my way home, which I eventually did, but night came right before I was able to complete the journey. However, the next day, I made it back and started working on securing the house. This is when I started to hear strange noises coming from the woods. Is there something out here? Which was definitely concerning. But finally, I came to day 20, the last day before the storm. I did some fishing, and as I did so, signs of the storm were already appearing. Snow was falling and the lake was freezing over, making me wonder just how bad this storm would be. Alright. I think I'm ready for this storm. I'm as ready as I can be. And the next day, the storm did in fact arrive. I woke up to see a strong current of snow and wind blowing over the house. And this is when I noticed that I had a lot lower visibility now, and I couldn't even sprint. Plus, snow and ice were forming all around the house and over the lake nearby. But this didn't stop me from venturing outside and towards the Magician's Theater. so that I could get some more dark oak wood. When I arrived at the theater though, there was no magician to be found. But I did find these really cool playing cards. Throwing cards? That's kind of cool. Okay. Anyways, as I left to head home, I kept hearing eerie noises coming from the woods. The next morning, I woke up to see that there were lots of mobs outside my house, but one of them was entirely new to me. That's not a normal mob. I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew it couldn't be good. And with snow building up all around my house, staying inside was my best option. And I'm glad I made that choice, because not long after, this happened. Okay. Okay. I really had no words to describe what I had just witnessed, but I now knew that for the remainder of this storm, I would be staying inside my house. See, the Wendigo is a creature of native folklore, said to be an evil spirit brought about by cannibalism, and, while it doesn't originate in Alaska, its origins can be traced back to the Algonquin tribe who resided mostly in Canada. Either way, I knew enough about it to want to stay far away from it. Gary was not fazed by that interaction. Gary is truly just built different. On day 23, I thought about what I could do in my house to better improve it. And that's when I came up with the idea of making a water purifier, which is something that would be really useful to me. However, as I started gathering the items to craft it, I realized that this would involve me going outside to get wood. And so carefully, I did. I was then able to craft the purifier. Okay, perfect. And the next day, I started purifying my water. I wasn't sure how long this storm would last, but I was trying to do helpful things while I waited inside. And despite the large buildup of snow, I at least hadn't seen the creature again. And on day 25, just as suddenly as it arrived, the storm vanished, leaving behind snow, ice, and misplaced polar bears. But I took this opportunity to set out for another expedition, this time not in the Arctic. I eventually rode my way to the Pillager Tower, which I decided to go ahead and loot. But maybe this was a bad idea. I ended up getting some alright loot, and breaking my shield. Okay. And so, the next day, I cut my losses and continued further south. That's when I ended up back in Prince William Sound. Only this time, I had some unexpected wildlife joining me. These are my favorite animals, literally. Wow. And as I progressed further into the Sound, I came across another settlement. Oh, here's a little settlement over here. This one didn't have anything interesting, but I stole some blocks to use for decoration in my house. And then I looked across the water and realized that I was standing in front of one of Alaska's natural wonders. Mendenhall Glacier is a relic of a much smaller ice age that occurred from the 14th to 18th centuries, bringing about a steady decline in temperature for the northern Atlantic region. In fact, it wasn't until the mid-18th century that this glacier actually started to retreat, as it is still doing so to this day. Either way, I was glad that I stopped to take a look. And if you find yourself in Alaska, I recommend you do the same. From here, I headed upstream where I eventually made camp. And on day 27, I awoke to a small jump scare. Oh, you little... I then crafted myself some new wool armor. And saw a really rare sight. Oh. That's a meteor. Okay. But I couldn't find where it landed. And so, naturally, I was forced to take in the incredible nature around me. The next day, I made my way further west into new waters. This area was more heavily wooded and had some really unique geography. So much so that, as it turns out, I was actually in a national park. The Kenai Fjords National Park is an incredible stretch of land and sea in southern Alaska that celebrates one of the most lively and diverse ecosystems of any US park. And even though this might be Minecraft, I could definitely see why. The rest of the day was spent traveling up this scenic coast, as I actually made it pretty far. And on day 29, I traveled even further up the coast. This is when I eventually came across a river, which I decided to take. Along the banks of this river, though, were a couple of grizzly bears. And so, I decided to show one a magic trick. Okay. No. I didn't mean to throw them. I wanted to get back in the boat. They're fast on land, aren't they? They're very fast. Just gotta... And now we go. That evening, I found a break in the mountain range nearby, and the next day, I traversed the forest to get to it. And as it turns out, this break in the mountains acted as a gateway into the Arctic, a side of the Arctic that I hadn't visited yet. And, in the distance, I saw another settlement. This one was a lot larger than the ones I'd visited before, and I quite liked it. In terms of loot, it didn't have much, but I honestly wasn't looking for loot at this point. I just wanted to explore, and maybe find some decorations for my house. And so, I decided to stay the night in the village. And the next morning, for whatever reason, I felt it necessary to climb these power lines. This is a good idea. Yeah, this is a good idea. Ooh. After that demonstration of natural selection, I realized that I was actually in trouble, as I didn't have any water, and so I set off into the Arctic. I came across some whale bones, and also some polar bears. Is that a baby polar bear? Yeah, that is. Okay. Yeah, there are lots of polar bears over there. Okay. And then, after a long time of travel, I came across something interesting. Point Barrow is the northernmost part of the United States, sitting at around 300 miles above the Arctic Circle. But I couldn't enjoy this American landmark, as I had my sights set on getting water. The next day, I traversed the Arctic terrain, basically all day. I did stop and get some whale bones to take home with me, and finally, at the end of the day, I found a familiar sight. Oh, there's the well. Okay. I kinda know where I am. And so, on day 33, I did even more Arctic travel. It also didn't help that I had to stop and get water constantly. But, as I went further east, I was met with a horizon of nothingness. And while I crossed the Arctic, let's talk about Alaska's most important Arctic animal, the polar bear. These guys are known for being the deadliest type of bear that there is, and that all comes from the fact that in the Arctic, there's just not much to eat. According to the WWF, only around 2% of a polar bear's hunts will actually be successful. This is because seals are their main source of food, and seals are underwater. But that doesn't stop them from adapting to their maritime needs, as these bears are actually categorized as marine mammals, having the ability to swim for days on end. But with that being said, I can now see just how hard it must be for polar bears to survive in this climate, as it felt like I was barely making progress across this snowy land. There is absolutely nothing ahead of me. But finally, on day 34, I reached the settlement that I knew, and then I got in my canoe and rode home. I had officially completed my first expedition across Alaska. Hello, home. And it was more or less successful. And so, as I reached my home, I placed down a few decorations. And I was happy with the way my house was turning out. However, the next morning, I realized that I wanted a lot more decorations in this home. And I knew that there was a building nearby that might just have some cool decorations. And so, I crafted some iron armor and went towards the Magician's Theater. And this time, he was back from vacation. Okay. Decorations-wise, this place is pretty top-notch. Well, okay, he's home, he's home, he's home. He hit me a few times and even pulled an actual magic trick on me. Oh. But when multiple rabbits started spawning and attacking me, I decided I might as well leave. After all, I wasn't exactly prepared for this sort of fight yet. And so, the next day, I ventured out to find a new structure that might just have some decorations for my base. It was about time that I found a new structure anyways, as I hadn't found many so far. And so I went through the forest and eventually ended up back at the glacier. Oh, I'm near the glacier. Yep, there's the glacier. Okay. Next morning, I came up with a good idea. I started to climb the mountain range nearby, thinking that from up here, I could see if there were any structures below. And while it was hard to walk along this mountain range, I did eventually spot something. Only, it wasn't a structure. This meteorite has some strange loot. What's this? But I kept it on me as I figured I might be able to craft something with it later. On day 38 though, I was beginning to feel frustrated with the lack of structures. But I also knew that this was a map based on Alaska, and structures wouldn't necessarily be everywhere. And so, I left the mountains and headed down into the forest. And a little while later, on day 39, I finally found a structure. That was unexpected, okay. It looked like a fire watchtower, and so I climbed inside. I played that game, Firewatch. It's a really good game. And it had some decent loot, and decorations for me to use. Arrow of Poison. Okay. From here, I stayed the night, and the next morning, I started my walk home. This was going to be a very long walk though, as I was on the opposite side of the map from what I could tell. In fact, that day, I only ended up making it back to Denali National Park. And unfortunately, I had forgotten something very important. The storm had arrived. I could barely see in front of me, and ice and snow were flying all around me as I walked in the direction of my house. However, as I reached the woods, I realized I might not even know where my house is if I can't see far in front of me. And, to make matters worse, I was worried that the Wendigo would show up. I ended up getting to a snowy area by the end of the day, and on day 42, I found the shore. From here I just followed the shoreline until I reached a familiar spot. Eventually, I came across what I could only assume was the Magician's Theater. And so from there, I docked my canoe and headed towards where my house should be. Finally, I reached it. But not before a moment of dreaded terror. The next morning, I stayed in my house. I got started on my fireplace and even made some fake cutting boards for my kitchen. And while this was a modest cabin, I was starting to like it. After all, it had to be pretty secure if the creature hadn't found a way in yet. Next day, I did some more housework and made a canteen, which stores a lot more water than the glass bottles. I purified the canteen and then went to look outside. And I really wish I hadn't. Wait. Yeah, okay. I see it. And, just like that, the creature was gone yet again. This made me equally happy and unhappy. But just like the creature, on day 45, the storm also disappeared. This meant I could now leave my house again, although I decided to stay nearby and get some resources. I ended up visiting the Magician's Theater again, and this time, he wasn't there. So I took this opportunity to steal some of the carpet and place it in my own house. It's just a bad carpet. I also crafted this singular bookshelf. I know, incredible progress. But the next day, I decided that it was time for me to try and summit Denali. And so, I gathered my equipment and set off for the mountain. After a good bit of travel, I only ended up making it to the glacier. And after even more travel the next day, I only ended up reaching the Denali National Park by sunset. But this meant that I would be able to summit the mountain in the morning. And so, I placed my bed down and got ready to climb. On day 48, I started climbing the mountain. This involved me first going through the forest, and eventually hiking up its steep side. As I climbed, I switched into my wool clothes to keep me warm, and that's when I realized just how high up I was. See, while I might have climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in the Africa video, this mountain is about 1,000 feet taller. And I could tell, as I actually climbed above the clouds this time. But as I kept climbing, the peak came into view. And after just a bit more climbing, I reached it. The view was amazing. So amazing that I tried to turn my render distance up to 64 chunks, which promptly crashed my computer. But after rejoining, on day 49, I was still able to get one last great view that morning. And then it was time for my descent. The descent was definitely harder than Kilimanjaro's, as it was a lot steeper. However, I eventually made it back to the glacier, and even got to walk across it. Finally off the mountain, I rejoined the water of Prince William Sound, and just looked around a bit. And this is when I got sprayed by a skunk. Ooh. Oh, okay. Oh, and I also found this weird unicorn creature. These videos are only semi-realistic, okay? It's a unicorn, isn't it? Anyways, the next morning, I realized it was already day 50. And so, as I rode my way across the bottom of Alaska, I want to give a quick thanks for watching this far into the video. And if you like what you've seen, maybe consider subscribing. I also have a channel membership where you can see exclusive videos, like me playing Phasmophobia, or me hunting the Wendigo in Minecraft. Also, big shout out to Dominic Rios for guessing where this video would take place. If you want to be mentioned in the next video, keep an eye out for my posts in the community tab. But with that being said, let's get back into the video. On day 51, I decided to leave the water and go inland, and this was the best idea I've had so far. I'd come across some sort of restaurant that not only had tons of villagers, but also tons of decorations and loot. And to be honest, this place was giving me a lot of decoration ideas for my house. This is the coolest little place. That may or may not be the reason as to why I took apart this jukebox display. Anyways, I stayed the night here, and the next morning, I took a few more things. Before noticing that there was another building next door. And so, I took the food that was in the building, and figured it was about time for me to head home. And on the way home, I noticed the watchtower off in the distance, which gave me a decent understanding of where I was. On day 53, I continued my travels and went by water. That's when I saw this whale that looked like it had been beat up pretty bad. That one's all beat up. I headed up the Yukon and just kept rowing. This really put into perspective how long this river was, as I rode almost all day long. But finally, on day 54, I made it home, and I immediately got to work on my decorations. I built up the jukebox and even got a library section going. And while I was doing all this, Gary was just sitting outside defending the house. And you know what? While I decorate, I might as well talk about the mighty Alaskan moose. See, the moose in Alaska can be found just about everywhere in the state. In fact, in some areas they outnumber the human population. And every winter, these large creatures end up shedding their entire set of antlers just for them to grow back in the spring. They really are unique animals. With that being said, let's turn our attention to my house tour that I gave at the end of day 55. Banners right there when you enter. Yeah, see? It's fun. Got a little bookshelf area, leisure, space, jukebox, kitchen, And then I've combined the brewery room with my bedroom. Don't ask me why, but it's the way it is, and I like it. After submitting my home on Property Brothers, I was awoken by a rather irritating presence. But I quickly got over it as I had something I wanted to do. I knew that the storm was due to arrive in 5 days, and I wanted to test something with the Wendigo that accompanied it. And so, I set off for the large Arctic settlement. I quickly arrived at settlement number 1 and made myself some new wool clothes from their tent. I also saw another meteor fall from the atmosphere, but there was no impact crater this time. Next morning, I set off for the big settlement. Only it was on the complete opposite side of the Arctic stretch, and that was made apparent to me when it took me all day to walk across the Arctic, and even then, I still couldn't see it. However, I finally arrived at the settlement around noon the next day, and I took some time to look around a bit more, and steal a little quartz for my home. Finally though, on day 59, I got to work on my plan. For this genius idea though, I would need an end pearl, and so I waited that night to see if any Endermen dared come close to me. But sadly, I didn't spot a single one. And so, the next day, I had to make some plan adjustments. But before I did that, I went to go and get some water and fish from the not so nearby body of water. And that's when I saw something that could actually be useful to my plan. So I went back to the settlement and did some preparation for the storm that would be arriving tomorrow. And arrive it did. As the storm surged on, I climbed up the power lines and got ready. I also found some iron blocks that I quickly mined, but eventually, I saw it. And as soon as I had seen it, the Wendigo vanished. So I was stuck at the top of the power lines waiting to see it again. But this time, I didn't. With no other option, I slept on the power lines. And the next morning, I walked along the power lines until the Wendigo showed up again. Except this time it was a bit closer. I can't look directly at it, I don't think. If I look directly at it, it does its weird thing. Alright. I wasn't sure if it was stuck in the car or if it just disappeared, but I wasn't going to risk checking. The villagers didn't seem to mind anyways. No, please go indoors. You don't know what's going on. Please, go indoors. I'd finally decided to step down from the pole, but I've done it. Only to get right back up. And at this point, I was, in every meaning of the word, stuck. However, on day 63, I stepped down off the pole. And as I didn't hear any growling or noises of evil, I went straight into one of the villagers' homes. But I wasn't exactly happy with the level of safety within. Either way, I soon found myself distracted by something else. You're in the toilet. You're not supposed to be inside it, you're supposed to... Alright, let me show you how it's done. Just kinda... There you go. Like that. Your turn. And with that out of the way, I decided to do the New York Times Wordle. Next morning, as the storm carried on, I had a change of plans. Since my initial plan to harm the creature didn't work, I figured it'd be best for me to head home. But, to test the creature one last time, I left to head home today. This was definitely a bold move, as the visibility was terrible, and after a few minutes of walking, I was completely alone in the Arctic. In other words, this would be the perfect time for it to attack. Yet, for whatever reason, it didn't. The storm ended the next day, and in an act of celebration, I threw this snowball at a polar bear. Okay. I thought snowballs were fun. And while my efforts to attack the Wendigo had failed, this didn't stop me from coming up with another plan for next time. But as I was now in the middle of the Arctic, I had to focus on getting home. I was able to reach the small settlement by sunset, except I had a bit of an issue when I went to sleep that night. Good night. No, what? It's not funny. Stop taking my bed. On day 66, I finally reached my home again. And this time, I had some more improvements to make. I replaced my kitchen counters with quartz, and I also cooked some fish and purified some water. This is because I was planning to have a showdown with the magician around the corner the next day. After all, I had failed with the creature, but who's to say I would fail with this strange magician? And so, the next day I set off to go and fight him. And this was a very difficult fight. From his projectile attacks to his evil rabbits that seemed straight out of Monty Python, I had a lot of trouble even landing hits on the magician. But then, I hit my stride. Okay. No way, no way. Okay, that's the second time I've been on half-heart in this series. Needless to say, this was probably not the best choice I've made in this series. But hey, I still survived, didn't I? Next morning, I decided to have a change of pace. I wanted to do some more exploring and see what other wonders Alaska had to offer. And so, I set out again. And as I reached the glacier area, I decided to test the magician's projectiles on this iron golem. I guess I just don't have the same finesse that he did. Then again, he didn't have enough finesse to kill me. So, I guess we're even. Anyways, as I rode further into the sound, I caught another sight of my favorite animal. And what better time is there to talk about these amazing creatures? Orcas, or killer whales, are found in all of the world's oceans, and are in fact the largest type of dolphin. But this doesn't stop them from being some of the smartest animals in the ocean. These aquatic Einsteins are estimated to have a similar IQ level to that of a 15-year-old human. In other words, these creatures are essentially animal kingdom geniuses. And as I left Prince William Sound, one of them decided it wanted to come with me. And you're still following me. Yet the next day I traveled much further than the Sound, and eventually decided to head into the forest nearby. And on day 70, I recognized that as a good choice. Oh, wait a minute. What exactly? Okay, great. This mine had some interesting loot, to say the least. Dirty water bottle, cobblestone armor. But it also just looked really cool. And while it did have some gold and other ores, I didn't feel like I needed them at the moment. S'mores. And so, I simply explored. The next day, I found another meteorite. But this one was too hot for me to mine entirely. I just ended up taking some of the ice off of it and leaving. But as I progressed down the Yukon, I got myself in a bit of a situation. The bear hit a lot harder than I expected it to. And for Alaska's infamous grizzly bears, that should have been no surprise. While these salmon-eating predators might look cute at first glance, they are known to be hostile towards those who threaten its space or its cubs, having the ability to run up to 30 miles per hour. However, most of the time they can come off as being harmless or even playful. So, as a quick survival tip, always treat grizzlies with respect. And my history of showing them magic tricks had certainly caught up to me. Anyways, the next few days were relatively uneventful, as I had focused my travels on getting to the Arctic. But on day 75, I came across a Pillager outpost. And naturally, I had to loot it. These guys were not easy though, as they got me really low and even broke my shield. But eventually, I broke their spawners and looted the structure. And the loot was okay at best. Next day, I was set on getting to the Arctic. This was where my showdown with the Wendigo would take place, as I wanted a wide open area, and instead of going around the mountain range, this time I just went over it. After a lot more travel, I eventually found a spot that I liked, and the next morning, I got to work on my contraption. The first part of it would be a simple archery tower, where I could hurl projectiles at it, as I didn't have any more arrows. I also placed some lanterns so I could stay warm while I wore my iron armor. On day 78, I awoke to a bit of a noise. And this time, no crater was left. Which was honestly fine by me, as I had some work to do. I strategically crafted a berry field, and thought of how I could possibly capture it without necessarily killing it. After all, if I could even just damage the creature, I would count that as a win. With that being said, the next day I did even more work. This time I gathered as much snow and concrete powder as I could, then I re-entered my hideout, knowing that once I did, I wouldn't be leaving for a while. Finally, day 80 rolled around, and this is where I built the actual contraption. 4 walls of concrete powder carefully placed on top of snow. The idea was to use my shovel and let gravity trap the Wendigo inside a concrete cage. I left a small window open for myself to watch, as well as a hole in the floor. And that night, I looked out into the Arctic, waiting for its arrival. The morning of day 81, I waited and stared out into the Arctic. And eventually, I saw a familiar figure. Only this time, it was acting a bit differently. It's not moving. It's not moving at all. Oh, we're getting snow in here. After figuring out what game it was playing, I was able to adapt. I see what it's doing. Okay. And even started throwing my projectiles at it. And they eventually landed. Only they didn't seem to be doing much damage. But I wasn't done yet. I still had to trap it. And so, I took my shovel out and began. Somehow, my plan had worked, and the Wendigo was trapped. Yes, I did. This was quite an accomplishment that it didn't seem very happy about. And after a few minutes, my celebrating was over. Where'd it go? Oh no. Oh yeah, that's not good. The next day, there were no creature sightings. Instead, I rebuilt some of the hideout and prepared myself for another attack. And on day 83, it decided to show up again. Okay, there it is. And so, I played its game. Red light. No, wait, green. It's green light. It's green. No, wait. I'm sorry. I forgot. Okay, wait. He's back in there. Also, the Wendigo wasn't the only visitor I had this day. Yeah? Oh, there's a wandering trader. Oh, and in typical Wendigo fashion, it disappeared. The next day was yet another uneventful day. But you know what? I'll take my victory against the Wendigo. I know I didn't kill it, but I ended up doing some damage. And who else can trap a Wendigo? Probably a lot of you viewing, but still. On day 85, the storm ended. I descended from my structure and took a look at what the wandering trader had to offer. As it turns out, it was selling a sapling of a tree I'd never heard of. So out of curiosity, I bought it. And then it was time to cross the Arctic again. But when I came back to the well, I figured I might as well give it one last look inside. I did a pretty risky jump. This is a really dumb idea. But I'm insane at that one Hypixel game in party games. And then entered the cavern. Despite the angry eels, I made my way into the large house and found some pretty nice loot. I also spotted a new mob of some kind that seemed to be frozen over. But I ended up sleeping here. And the next morning, I finished exploring the big house. I also killed the undead frozen creature, and it transformed into some kind of orb. But it was time for me to escape, so I did. Time to go. It is time for me to get going. And when I reached the surface, I continued my travels across the Arctic. That was a choice to explore that. However, that night, I waited to see if the northern lights would appear. And sadly, they didn't. On day 87, I managed to reach the small settlement. And this is where I decided I would be staying that night, as I wanted to give the northern lights one last chance to show up. And so, I stayed and hung out with the villagers, who were really cool and fun. Yeah, anyways, that night, I was pleasantly surprised. The Aurora Borealis, or Northern Lights, are an incredible phenomenon caused by the sun's heat, creating a solar wind that travels and hits our atmosphere. And that ends up creating this incredible effect. The native Inuit people actually believe that these are the souls of the dead. And you know what? I kinda like that explanation. And, like all good things, my viewing experience soon came to an end. Okay. How do you even pop up on someone's roof? Next morning, I returned home only to be greeted by something other than Gary. After that close encounter, I did a few more home improvements, before then adding some decorative trims to my armor, and I thought it looked pretty cool. But on day 89, it was time for me to get ready for one final trip. I did some final home additions before planting my tree sapling that I had just remembered, and soon after, the tree grew. Oh, wait a minute. And I really liked it. That is a really cool tree, yeah. Last thing I did was purify some more water, and finally, on day 90, I set off. Only this time I wanted to bring someone who had been with me from the very beginning. That was, of course, Gary. And so Gary and I started our journey, and almost immediately I noticed that he had gotten a sort of haircut. I showed Gary all of the places as we traveled and gave him some good advice for each spot. We also crossed this river, and that's when my cat, Valentino, decided to say something. Oh, my cat just farted. Oh my gosh. Valentino. Oh my gosh. That's foul. There's something actually physically wrong. You should probably go to the vet. With that aside, I continued my travels with Gary, only to be interrupted by some hungry seagulls. Okay, that's fine. On day 91, Gary and I made it to the glacier. And the next day, we hiked the mountains. In fact, the next few days were used up by our travels with nothing truly interesting happening. Only me and my moose, traversing the Alaskan terrain. But finally, on day 96, we reached the destination I had in mind, Denali National Park. From here, I knew that Gary would be happy with a new family of moose. Alright, go be with your new family, okay? These guys will take you in. And the next day, I decided to summit Denali one last time. This resulted in another tough climb, where I ended up staying the night in the side of the mountain. Finally, the next morning, I reached the summit for my second and final time. Torch number 2. And this time, I decided to stay here. Not only that, but I celebrated my series by shooting some arrows from the summit, which was a really great idea. Well, that could have been bad. But that night, my stalling on the summit was worth it. The next morning, I descended the mountain, and as I did so, I was ready to rate Alaska's difficulty. See, while Alaska might have been my favorite in terms of wildlife and natural sights, it was also the most difficult I've done, hitting a solid 8 out of 10 in my difficulty ranking. This is because I've never been reduced to half a heart so many times in one series. That, paired with the bloodthirsty Wendigo, made for a series that I wouldn't soon forget. And as I completed my descent, I spotted a raccoon. Well, hello there. And then I went and joined Gary one last time, before witnessing bald eagles committing a crime. What? It's like dipping it in the water. Why is the eagle waterboarding the salmon? It doesn't make sense. It was finally day 100, the last day in the series. I walked with Gary and said my goodbyes, before thinking about how great the last 100 days were. Okay, Gary. It's that time. With that being said, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.